All right, we are live. Welcome, everybody. Sorry for the delay. We thought we were live, but we weren't live. We were just talking to ourselves. All right, welcome to the show. My name is Ross. I'm the co-founder and CEO of GridRival. With me today is Michael Ursinoli, our CTO, and William Laddie, our principal software engineer. It is less than 48 hours to the first Formula One lockdown of the season at the Bahrain Grand Prix. We are here today to talk about strategy. We're here today to talk about Max Verstappen and whether or not he's a good pick to have on your team starting the season. I think you probably know our stance on this if you're here and you got the push notification that we sent. Before we kick things off, make sure to like and subscribe to our channel if you want to receive more content like this. Throughout the season, we do a show every single week. Going forward, it will be a live show where we talk about strategy coming into the race ahead, talk about maybe what drivers are undervalued, overvalued, who to pull off your team, who to put on your team, and answer any questions that y'all might have during the season. So let's get into it and talk about Max Verstappen. If you have Max Verstappen on your lineup right now going into the first race of the season, there are some things that you should consider and be very careful about. So I'm going to step back and kind of go over the core tenets of the game to help you understand why Max might not be the best choice to start out. The core, any fantasy game is based off of accumulating fantasy points based off of the real world performances of athletes. So the goal and the way that you win on GridRival and on most other fantasy applications is you accumulate as many fantasy points as you can throughout the season. And the way you do that on GridRival is by having the best team possible, right? And so we'll get into why Max, it might sound a little bit contrarian to what we're telling you. But the way that you ultimately build the best team possible long-term, not just for a single race, is by having the most amount of fantasy money, right? We all start the season with 100 million pounds or $100 million in fantasy budget to spend on our lineup. But if you did not know this yet, during the season, you can increase that. Some people that have played this game for multiple years and really, really understand the game mechanics, at the end of the season, you're going to see them with 140 million, sometimes even more in team value that they can spend to build a better team. So how do you do that? The way that you do that is you find drivers that you think are undervalued and you sign them for contracts. Everybody probably knows at this point, you can have a driver on your team from anywhere from 1 to 5 races. So as an example, if you sign, let's say Esteban Ocon, I don't know what his price is right now. It's probably somewhere around 14 million. If you sign him to your team for 3 races and he has 3 really amazing races, he might go up in value as much as $5 or $6 million. And when that 3-race contract is over, he will drop off your team. And that $5 or $6 million increase in value will get added to your bank account. That means that next time you fill that contract position, that spot in your lineup, you're going to have more money to spend. If you do that over and over again by way of smart picks and, let's be honest, luck throughout the season, you can have you can increase your team value by quite a bit over the course of the season. And that's how ultimately the best players of this game really tend to focus the first half of the season on finding and building their team's value. And then usually the second half more on points. So the second half of the season is when you're going to see a lot of people that really know what they're doing with drivers like Max on their lineup, right? Because they've accumulated the money they need to build a team. Now they're thinking about, how do I capture as many points as possible? The other thing worth noting is that drivers like Max, and we'll get into value in a second, but drivers like Max, there are certain points that he's probably not going to be as likely to earn that other drivers might be. For instance, overtake points. I guess to take a step back, it's worth noting that oftentimes the driver that finishes the race in first place is not going to earn the most fantasy points. If anybody's ever done traditional fantasy football, either US football or European or fantasy basketball, you know that it's usually not based off of who won the game. It's based off of a lot of other attributes, and that's the same on GridRival as well. So drivers can earn points for overtakes. They can earn points for beating their teammate, and the number of points they get for beating the team will be determined by how much they beat their teammate. We also have a formula that we created called improvement points. And the way improvement points work is we track a driver's 8-race average finish position. And if they finish above that at the 9th race in that sequence, they will earn improvement points. And how many improvement points they'll earn will be based off of how much they beat that average by. And the thought process is there is, again, using Esteban Ocon as an example. I think we probably all agree that Esteban Ocon finishing a race in, call it, fourth place is probably a much more significant accomplishment than Max Verstappen finishing a race in first place. So he's going to get points. So those are primarily improvement and overtake points, are points that probably Max is never going to get. So that's one thing to think about. But the big thing to think about, going back to value, if the goal, especially early on, I think probably the first, honestly, 3 to 5 races of the season are the most critical in terms of really optimizing your team to find who's undervalued and make as much money as you can out the gate. So that leads us to the ultimate question. Why is Max potentially not a great pick to start? The reason why is because Max can't really go up much further than he is. He's already at 30 million. The highest a driver can get is 33 million. You'll almost never see it. If Max does go up, it's going to be by a teeny bit. It's going to be by maybe $500,000, or I think it's denoted as pounds in the app. He's not that the max a driver can increase or decrease on our game is 2 million. So he probably is not going to go up 2 million at all. I doubt that Max's value at any point this whole season will hit 32 million. So we actually have some examples of this. I have some screenshots I can share, and we'll go back to, we're going to revisit last season. And can you guys see this? Is this showing up?
Yeah.
Okay. Last season, the absolute all-time probably best contract anybody could have ever picked in the history of GridRival is to have signed Alonso on a 5-race contract. And if you did that, this is everybody can see, if you're in GridRival, you can look at a driver's profile and click the charts tab, and we're essentially looking at Fernando Alonso's salary for 2003 season. He was way underpriced, frankly, and so a lot of people had him on their lineups. Not everybody had him for 5 races, but if you signed him for 5 races, you made on that one contract almost $10 million coming out of the course of the season. So that's an example, and there's some other examples. If you look at him at what it looks like, I don't know what race that is, British Grand Prix maybe, he had another jump up for 2 races, and then he dropped. And so also worth noting, you can also lose value on your team. I think last year at one point I was up to 128 million. I think I finished the season at 113 in one of my teams. So it's very possible to lose value as well. So let's contrast that to Max's salary for last season. So as we had mentioned, it is possible to go up in value. As you see, towards the start of the season, he did jump a little bit, but this chart is expanded. So the low side of the chart is 27 and the highest 31. The most he ever got was about 31. So he started at 30. The highest he ever got was 31 million. So that is the core thing to really think about in terms of signing your drivers. The top, I don't know, guys, you give me your opinion. I think the top probably 6 to 8 drivers are, I'd say it's safely 6, are probably not going to fluctuate a ton or be as advantageous for you in the first 4 or 5 races as some of the lower ranked drivers who undoubtedly, and we will find out at practice, we got a little insight from testing, but undoubtedly are going to be underpriced. So that is kind of the core reason you should think about maybe holding off on putting somebody like Max on your team. Will he still get a lot of points? For sure. He's probably going to, if he doesn't get the most points, he's going to be very, very close. He'll probably be ranked top 3 or 4 in terms of fantasy points. And so I wouldn't say it's a bad decision. I just think there's more strategic decisions you could make to set yourself up for success going into the start of the season. Now, the last thing I will say, and then I'll let Michael and William give their opinion, and we'll start getting into some Q&A. So if you have questions, now's the time to start typing them in. Last thing I'll say is you also going to want to watch Max and other drivers and be ready to jump on them if you see them have a bad week, or probably unlikely in the case of Max, 2 in a row. But if Max has a DNF, or any driver typically has a DNF, they're usually going to drop in value the most amount that you can drop, which is 2 million. So that's something to think about too, is pay attention to who's having a bad week. If somebody dropped $2 million, And it wasn't because, they have a bad car and it's going to be continuously bad, or, name any of the other factors that could contribute, but it was purely just they crashed, somebody crashed them, they blew up a power unit. Consider picking them up. And that kind of brings me to my last point, or I guess my second last point, which is think carefully about the contract lengths that you use, especially out the gate, and give yourself options. So some of you may have seen the video I did on Instagram about kind of the 5 biggest mistakes that new players make. One of the ones that we see a lot is people have a roster, and every single position on that roster is the same contract length, meaning you have 5 drivers and a constructor, and they're all 4 race contracts or 5 race contracts. Again, there is circumstance that comes into play, and there's times where that may work out. But if you do that, what you should consider is that you're not leaving yourselves a lot of options. Like, let's say in race 3, Max does crash and he drops 2 million, and you want to pounce on him, you want to jump, but you don't have the open spot to do it. You can release any driver early from a contract, but you have to pay 3% of their current salary. So there's a price. So just think strategically about your contract lengths and think about, how do you leave yourself with options? Kind of a good rule of thumb for me, and just full caveat, I'm an emotional player of this game. I am not always in first place. I think I ranked on the global leaderboard last year like 45th hundred with my best team. So just take this for what you will. But I am consistently, probably the top percent. I always try to think about leaving myself to have one driver rolling off, or one position rolling off contract every week. So I have at least one spot and one opportunity to fill up a spot, or make a change if I want. So I'll kind of shut up. If you guys have any other insights that you want to provide on the topic of Max, or value or strategy or anything, go for it, and I'll start looking through some of the questions.
Totally. So what I tell people is that we don't know what a perfect lineup looks like until after the race. So keep that in mind, right? Like all advice is caveated with the race is still a couple of days away. So with Verstappen on your lineup to start, your points to money spent isn't going to be the highest, and also the risk that you take with a DNF is quite high on that $2 million drop. So what I would say instead is you have to look for the drivers who are undervalued. So, for example, like if you're looking at Verstappen, or you're considering Verstappen, who else should you consider? Well, you need to consider another driver who is likely going to perform at a high points to value ratio. So you're going to be looking at Norris, you're going to be looking at the Ferraris, Leclerc and Sainz, you're going to be looking at Hamilton, Piastri, and we're talking about like the kind of quote unquote blue chip drivers, right? The north of $20 million salary range, and targeting for that, because you don't want to. We did see this on our Discord with some folks talking about it. Is you want to strike that balance between adding value to your team with undervalued contracts, but still getting enough points where you're not putting yourself in a points hole, so early in the season. So you don't want to have a $20 million available bank balance because you picked all back markers who you think are going to do well. You do want drivers at the top, the middle, and the bottom to both maximize points and value together. That is the way to play the game, in my personal opinion. So I don't have Verstappen on any of my lineups. I am in several leagues. I'm running the Ferraris. I'm running Hamilton as kind of my north of $20 million drivers as alternates. Case in point, if Ferrari is the second best car on the track this season, they're not currently the second best car in the app. So there's upside there, both on points and on contract value. What you got, William?
I think you guys both covered it pretty well. Yeah, you want upside, but you also want to be able to generate points. And you mentioned Ferrari. I have Ferrari right now. I might consider racing Bulls, but right now I'm with Ferrari for constructor, because I think there is some upside to gain value, but I think they will also generate me a bunch of points. And then maybe I can pivot into Red Bull once Ferrari has grown in value and generate even more points. You're looking to position yourself to upgrade as the season goes on with all of your picks, and so that's what I'm looking at. But I also don't want to bury myself in a hole, or maybe I'm leaving 200 points on the table because I'm just chasing value, because it's going to be hard to make those points up during the season.
For sure. All right, well said. So we're going to go into Q&A. So the last kind of 45 minutes we have totally reserved for questions. I have a few. And guys, if you see one you want to answer, please point it out. Explain the specifics of how sprint points will work from Nathan. You can actually see it in if you go to your league settings, you click that little circle icon when you're on your My Team screen. You can see the scoring of all of the different types of points. And so sprints are pretty basic. We're going to give 20 points to the top place finisher all the way down to 1 point to the last place. So basically goes evenly 1 point down all the way through the leaderboard. Couple questions about desktop app, when we'll be able to use it on a desktop. I want to look at GridRival for stats instead of flipping to the F1 app. This year is our goal, hopefully. We previously had one, but it was way out of date. And so it is our intention to get it back online. We know that a lot of folks want to have a full screen experience, especially some of the more diehard players who like to look at a lot of data and statistics. So it for sure is on the roadmap. I couldn't give you an exact date, but it is something we are very much thinking about. Any good Reddits for GridRival? There is a GridRival Reddit. It's not something that we personally manage, but we do have a Discord. Michael, maybe you could post a link to the Discord in the chat, and I will pin it. We have an increasingly active Discord community. We'll actually probably have a link to the Discord in the app, maybe in another week or two, as things kind of to get growing over there. But that's probably the place to join any conversations. There's a pretty active community there, people that share lineups, before races and talk strategy. So highly recommend it if you want to stay engaged. What about teams? Do you want Red Bull or no? Similar thing with teams. Maybe even more so teams, because teams, and this is a great question, teams can actually fluctuate $1 million more in value than drivers at the max. So the most a driver will move up or down in a single race is 2 million. The most a team can move up or down in a single race is 3. And so if you have a lot of conviction, either after testing or after practice, like let's say you think Kick or VCarb, or anything, one of these insane names that are getting more and more confusing to be able to understand. If you think any of those are undervalued, you definitely want to have one of them on your team, because let's say Kick is really undervalued out the gate. If they have 2 amazing races, they could go up as much as $6 million in 2 weeks. So definitely the same thing on the high end too, is like if you sign Red Bull, Red Bull as a constructor is actually probably more dangerous than Max as a driver, because Red Bull has Checo. And I think like Checo isn't quite as consistent, and also is not as consistently finishing in first place. So that team is more likely to go down than it is up even a little bit. That's my opinion. Let's see. You guys see any good questions? Is the beginning of the year the best place to find good value contracts? 100%. And the reason why is because we only have so much data when we set these salaries, right? And there may be a future day where the league administrator can toy with the starting salaries, and some of your smaller leagues, you guys can kind of mess with them to your heart's content. But right now, we actually go through a process as a team. We went through it about a month ago, where we look at all of the data from the end of last season. We used to look at testing data, but now the season is getting so compressed that testing is only a week before the start of the season. So we don't want to wait that long to get our game live. And so we go through the process of thinking about where should we start these drivers and where should the starting salaries be. And a lot of times, this is what happened with Alonso last year. If anyone was looking at the chart I showed you, is kind of nobody predicted, and not even really, was it at testing that we kind of discovered that Aston, I think it was, Aston didn't finish 2022 in any sort of amazing position, and then they came into 2023, and it was pretty obvious in testing that like Alonso was way undervalued. And so a lot of people signed him, and that is what you're going to see, is like the start of the season is probably the time where you might see people who are significantly undervalued. It's not going to happen as much the rest of the season. Once you're in the season, the way that it happens great example from last year would be Oscar Piastri with McLaren, right? Is you have a manufacturer that brings a really powerful upgrade and a guy that was, finishing consistently in the middle of the field starts finishing in 5th and 6th on average. That's how you're going to get team value in the middle of the season. But I think, as we all know, as F1 fans, that doesn't always happen. And I certainly wouldn't bank on that happening as much as I would bank on there being underpriced drivers at the start of the season for sure.
Yeah, I spotted a critical one. Morgan, what is the disadvantage to only signing all of your drivers for a one race contract? Morgan, if you're still on the call, do not do this. This is a critical mistake. So within the game, there's a rule called the one race interval rule, which means that once your contract expires with that driver, you cannot sign them for the next event. There's a cooldown period, and then you can re-sign them. If you signed all 5 of your drivers to one race, the next race you cannot select any of those 5 drivers again. There's only 20 drivers on the grid, so you're going to really be limiting your options. Could it work out? Sure. Is it incredibly risky? Yes. So I would definitely avoid that. And I have one more. Brian M., are you guys hiring product designers by chance? Not at the moment, but send your resume to support@GridRival.com. We do intend to grow and hire.
The other thing I'd say about a one race contract too is if all of those go down in value, you could be in a tough spot. Now there is a downside protection on GridRival. Anytime your team drops below 100 million and you drop a contract, you always get a bump back up to it, because if you drop below that, the game just gets really difficult to play. But generally speaking, the only times I've ever used one race contracts are if I am like 90% sure a driver is going to go up in value after one event. A great example could be what we were talking about earlier, right? If Max has a DNF, he's going to drop 2 million in value. It would be very unlikely that he came back and did another DNF and dropped again, or finished a race in a position that resulted in a value drop again. Meaning, he could be a good pick on a one race contract. But even then, in that situation, more likely, I'm probably signing him for 3 or longer. It just kind of depends on the circumstance. Will Smith, can you detail more how team values change? So I'm not going to go into a ton of detail, but the best thing you do is you go to support.gridrival.com and then go to the league section. There are 2 articles, and I think we're probably one of the only F1 fantasy games that literally details exactly how our value fluctuation works. So there'll be an article there, I think, called Formula One Salary Fluctuation Advanced. And that literally shows you the table of how we recalculate salaries every single week. So you can use that to your heart's content. A lot of people use it to model how they pick their team. We have people with Excel spreadsheets every now and then email us and show us like they have these calculators that they build. So
go ahead. The most important thing to know is that the value adjustments are based on how many fantasy points you score. So whoever scores the most fantasy points is going to be in line for the biggest increase in value if they're not there already. If somehow Max scores the most points, his bump's not going to be too big. But if it's say Ricardo scoring the most points, like he's going to increase by 2 million.
Mm-hmm.
And so that is a common question we get as well. Well, Max won the race. How come he didn't increase in value? Well, Max was maybe 5th in fantasy points because a bunch of midfielders overachieved and scored a bunch of points from improving over their average or from overtakes or something like that.
Right.
Yeah. There's a good one. Jake, talk more about how we should set up contracts on blue chip drivers compared to our middle and lower end drivers. There's no right answer. It really it's lineup dependent for sure. I'll give a personal example with one of my lineups. So in one of my lineups, Sainz is my most expensive driver, to put it that way. And I have him signed, I believe, to a 4 race, might even be a 5 race. The thinking there is Sainz showed a lot of competency in the car last year. There's a lot of speculation the car has improved this year. And he's valued at 23 million, 1.4 million below Leclerc. So I would, and he's got something to prove this year with not having a seat finalized for next year. So I'm making a long-term play on Sainz at the beginning of the season, whereas on the bottom I'm going to talk about Kevin Magnussen. Kevin Magnuson's the lowest ranked driver in the game right now, $3.4 million. If you want to play a bet, here's a low risk bet. If Kevin Magnuson finishes last at Bahrain, you're not going to lose much. Both from a value or points, it's kind of expected, right? If Kevin Magnuson finishes the race and two other people don't, you will get both a value increase, a personal improvement point increase. You'll have fantasy points plus the salary increase. So on a Kevin Magnuson, I think I have several lineups that have him on a 1 or 2 race contract. Because I believe that so long as he finishes the race and other people don't, there's going to be some improvement there.
For sure. Someone asked where the Discord link was. I just posted it. So if anyone wants to join our Discord, we'd love to have you there. Let's see. How much to keep in the bank for a reserve? That's a great question. Again, I don't know there's a great answer, but I will say if you're starting the season and you've used all your money, it's probably an indicator that you maybe haven't optimized your team as much in the way that we're saying. Because my gut is if I was to look at a team right now that utilized all their money, they probably have some drivers or elements, drivers or constructors on there that probably are unlikely to have a lot of value in them. I have a team in one league that has, I think, 14 million left in the bank with all 6 positions filled. Now, that may change wildly after practice. I think the first practice rounds of the season are probably the most important practice rounds of the entire year. Because it's the first time we really get to see, in testing, there's sandbagging and all sorts of stuff that goes on. So I think the first testing of the years is probably one of the most important that you can pay attention to. But all that to say, my lineup may change, but generally speaking, really early on, first 5 to 8 to 10 races, you really do want to be focused on value. And sometimes you just can't find it in the higher priced drivers, meaning you might have some money left in your bank. That's definitely not a bad thing. Let's see. See any?
Yeah. While Ross is looking for one, I would say, probably some of the top performers in the game after race 1, I would estimate, just an estimation, they're going to have between $1 and $4 million in their bank balance that's unused.
Yeah.
So, I saw someone post a lineup. They had 20 million left in their bank, and I was like, nope, that's way too much to leave on the table. Yeah, you're going to be, call it sub 5, right? But again, we don't know what the perfect lineup is until after the race.
Yeah. Matt Motal asked a really good question. Since you can't drop below 100, is there a reason to run a very boom or bust week 1 strategy in hopes of hitting big, knowing you can't really drop? That's a great question. I have never personally tried that. It is certainly a risk you could take, and if you do it, I would love to hear from you afterwards. But just for the sake of disclaimer and not making you make any bad choices, I don't know that I want to give a strong opinion one way or the other on it, but it certainly could happen. You are not wrong. I think the first race is the time to test that theory if you're going to test it.
I see a good question that just came in from Eddie. Is talent driver ideal for a midfield driver that's expected to beat their teammates significantly and consistently, as opposed to someone who finishes in the points but only 1 place ahead of their teammate? And I would say we were actually just discussing on yesterday's stream how I think Albon's points were somewhat buoyed by him massively outperforming Logan Sargent last year. And so that is definitely a consideration with talent driver. Another would be if their team has brought upgrades, and this is potentially a week where they're going to outperform where they were like over the last few races, and there's a lot of improvement points to be had. Or a midfield driver who had a problem the previous week and they're a bargain, and their average finish has been deflated just then. So potential upside there. So yeah, that is a consideration with talent driver.
Yeah.
Another consideration with talent driver selections is there's popular choices and unpopular choices for talent drivers. And the most kind of like league upsetting moments is when someone like a Lance Stroll, who typically has a very, very low adoption rate, is someone's talent driver and happens to be one of the races that he shows up for and crushes. This happened at the end of last season. So there is also a strategy of, with your talent driver, if everyone in your league has the same talent driver, you're just kind of keeping up, but you're not breaking away. So you could also think about riskier plays within your talent driver if you're trying to go for a boom or bust type of strategy. Lance Stroll talent driver memes were a thing last year.
There's there's two good questions that might go well together, or one's a statement, and I don't know that I agree. Jason Stoddard said, with Lewis leaving AMG, I personally think he's the most undervalued early this year. He might be. I think Lewis actually has the potential to be, overvalued. I think Lewis has the potential to be very undervalued. But I think we'll see. I think practice will tell. I think if Lewis is anywhere in like 3, 4, 5 range in practice, I will probably roster him because I think right now he's 7th, and so he could be for sure an opportunity. But I'm purely talking about the first couple races. The rest of the season, I fully understand what your argument is, which is mentally he's going to be in Ferrari's world here starting pretty soon. That connects us to a next question, which was, which pair would you rather have for the first 3 races, Piastri and Leclerc or Sainz Hamilton? Me personally would go Sainz Hamilton again, with the caveat of we haven't seen practice yet. I'm purely talking about testing. I think Sainz had one of the fastest lap times in all of testing. Hamilton, not so much, but I think, so I think with Sainz Hamilton, you kind of have a high and a low, and maybe with Leclerc and Piastri, you have 2 more in the center, maybe. So that would be my pick. I don't know if you guys have a different opinion.
I think that driver pairing selection is going to be a point separator on how things actually turn out. I think that's a lot of people are thinking that combo of either or pairings. So it'll be interesting to see. I don't think you can go wrong at the moment just with the information that we know, but some people are going to go one way, some people are going to go the other, and we'll see where the numbers come out. But I think either or is a good way of thinking about your kind of top end drivers.
Feels like a 50-50 as well as far as those pairings. I am on Leclerc Piastri right now. 24 hours from now, after we've had practice, I might be singing a different tune. I will throw one fun fact in about Lewis since we were discussing his impending departure. As I recall, he did win his last race with McLaren, when he was in a lame duck situation there. Granted, that was a number of years ago, but just saying.
I think it was more than 1 decade ago.
It was quite a while ago, but so you never really know. Like, he might be 1 foot out the door. It also depends on how the relationship with the team holds up over the year. If you start to see friction there, like more than usual, then that might be a sign as well.
I got a good question for you, William. And before I get to it, just a reminder to everybody to like and subscribe to the channel if you want to see more content like this. We're going to do pre-race shows for most of the races throughout the season. That'll be live Q&As where we talk about lineup strategy, who may be to take off your team, who to put on your team, who might be underpriced, overpriced, all that sort of stuff. So if you don't want to miss it, join and subscribe to the YouTube channel. We probably will not be doing push notifications for every single live show we do. So that's the place to find it. Also, join the Discord. There was a link at the top of the chat to find the Discord. Matt had a great question, and I say this for William because William is a very seasoned poker player and frequenter of Vegas. He says Vegas odds versus contract price. Say these guys are all good values. Is that a good process? And then he said, comparing Vegas odds to driver values on GridRival, Lewis, Sainz, Leclerc, Ricardo, Magnussen, Racing Bulls, all might be undervalued. My gut instinct is that seems to line up fairly well.
I'm seeing that post. Lewis, Sainz, Leclerc, Ricardo, Magnussen, Racing Bulls. I don't know if those all fit in one lineup, but that's a lineup I could see myself going with if that would actually fit. My current lineup is a little bit different. I don't have Magnussen I don't have Lewis or Sainz actually. I have Leclerc, Ricardo, Yuki, Bottas, and Piastri, I think. But similar idea. Like I like the thinking where like if they're projected higher than they're currently ranked, there's probably some value to be had. And of those, I think Ricardo and Magnussen would be your two talent eligible drivers, and Ricardo all day for me. Like I think Ricardo is the best talent driver pick, knowing what we know at the moment.
I do think that lineup fits. I'm checking right now. Yeah,
I think it does too.
Okay, if that
it fits,
lineup fits, like
yeah, it
I
fits.
could.
Oh, go ahead.
I like that lineup. Like if that lineup fits, I like that lineup.
Yeah,
it fits with 4 million left in the bank.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that it's definitely a good lineup. It's going to come down to contract length, I think.
Yeah.
I think it's a very competitive lineup. It's just managing that contract length.
If you've got 5 million left, like I might like Bottas over Magnussen, like depending on how practice shakes out. That's my one tweak I would make there. But sorry to interrupt.
Yeah, Bottas is significantly undervalued compared to Zhou. So if he performs at Zhou's level, then there'll be some upside.
Do you ever think it's worth picking a driver that's $4 to $5 million more expensive than their teammate? For example, Alonso or Lando.
Absolutely, if you think their teammate sucks.
Yeah. I was gonna say it's obviously circumstantial.
Yeah, if that is the case, like you're going to score a bunch of points from beating your teammate by a bunch of spots, which
sure.
Apologies to the Logan Sargent fan club, but Albon did that quite a few times last year.
Yeah, he did. Ryan from our team is the president of the Logan Sargent fan club. Couldn't join the podcast today. He might be listening. All right. Talent driver ideal for a midfield driver that's expected to be their teammates significantly. Okay, is talent driver ideal for a midfield driver that's expected to beat their teammates significantly and consistently? Did we already answer this one?
Yeah, we answered that one already.
Okay.
Yeah.
Should we stay away from picking teammates?
Oh, this is a good one. How much does save that one, William, so we don't miss? How much does the track affect your choice for that week? Monza is better for some teams, Arrow setup. So I'll just say again, if you missed me say it earlier, I'm a total emotional player. I don't get into that much level of depth. There is some people that absolutely do. I would say, this is just my opinion, I think if this game was more modeled, and we probably will have a different game type than our contracts game in the future. But if the game was modeled around being able to change your entire roster out every single race and stuff like that, I think track would make a lot more would make a lot more difference. I think it is really difficult to manage consistently the length of contract to perfectly line up with where a driver is going to excel specifically at a certain track. Not impossible. And like I said, the best players of this game that are going to be the ones that finish, top 1% on the global leaderboard of however many, tens to 100,000 players there are probably going to be thinking about things like that.
Yeah. And with the sprints, if you want to factor in the availability of sprint points, you can schedule your contracts that way. Like if you want max for the sprint races, for example, you're going to want to have him out for one of these first 4 races if you want to have him for both rounds 5 and 6. And that might be a consideration as well. I can tell you on the NASCAR side, I tried something like that, like with our new NASCAR game this year, picking people who would be really good at the first 2 races of the year. And most of them crashed. So what do I know?
Mm-hmm.
But like that is a legitimate strategy. And if you have some inkling that somebody might be good on a particular track, like Monza, Spa, Monaco, one of the oddball tracks, then absolutely consider that with your contract lengths. Make sure that you have people available when you want them.
Yeah. I've seen a few questions about the GridRival hat. There's no hats for sale at the moment. We do have black on black. See, those are one-offs we made internally for the team, but we would love to make some and start selling them at some point. So when that happens, y'all will be the first to know. William, did you say you had a question that you had found in there?
Should we stay away from picking teammates, or is there no disadvantage? The one immediate disadvantage would be that only one of them can score points for beating their teammate. Of course, you're guaranteed then that you're going to score teammate points on one driver or the other. So, like, your ceiling is slightly lower in that one regard, is what I would say with teammates. And if the team ends up, this is more of a beginning of the season problem. If the team as a whole has some kind of reliability problem that's going to burn them, then both drivers likely get burned that way. Or later in the year, if we find one of the power units is maybe inclined to start taking penalties,
Yeah.
that's where you might get into a little bit of trouble.
Yep. The higher is a higher value driver better than a higher value team? Actually, we already answered that earlier, so feel free to revisit this. It'll be live on YouTube afterwards.
How often are you using the feature of cutting contracts early? Example, McLaren show up poorly at Bahrain while Aston steps up and shows great pace. Would you then cut Oscar early to pick up Alonso? Highly situation dependent, but yes, I would say cutting contracts becomes a lot more common from the midpoint of the season onwards when you have that bank balance where you're like, okay, paying this 3% fee on one or two drivers is not going to change my overall impact on my driver lineup. And then you make that move so you can maximize your points moving forward. It's definitely a strategic part of the game. But what I definitely also do see are support emails that come in of people saying like, hey, I didn't mean to do that. Or like, I highly regret the decision of getting rid of this driver, because if you pay that contract termination fee, you have the one race interval rule now in the game. You can't go back and re-sign that if you change your mind. So you're locking that driver out for that event. So early on in the season, unless something goes really sideways, would you want to pay that contract termination fee this early in the season? But it's very common midway through and onwards.
Mm-hmm.
And I think I paid exactly one early release fee last year. Maybe I'm not using this enough, but it was like either Vegas or Abu Dhabi, and I pivoted from one Mercedes driver to the other. I forget which way it went, and that ended up being the winning move to win the company week last year. So,
I will probably do it maybe once, maybe twice a year, and it's usually when I have a very, very high degree of confidence that something has gone wrong. So some people use it more than others, but I personally, it's not something that I engage with a lot. There was another question similar to having two of the same drivers in the same team to splitting between driver and constructor. So having one driver and then having that constructor on your team. I don't know if you have a different answer there, William.
You have your eggs in one basket. That's the one risk you're taking on. But if you think there's massive upside, like let's say Racing Bulls, if we think that they have a lot of upside, then that's sort of your boom or bust move. Like take Ricardo and take Racing Bulls and hope for the best.
Yeah.
So
there was a time last season, I'm pretty sure, where I had both McLaren drivers and McLaren on my team. Again, high risk, but that was also a high reward decision. So sometimes you just got to weigh it against the potential payoff and risk associated with doing it.
Yeah. If your guy crashes out of the race, that's now 1.5 entries that you have gone. Like if you have the constructor as well.
Matt, yes, Ross does look like John Krasinski.
Where is that?
It's in the chat. We've had this. It is a thing.
Oh wow, I've never heard that before.
Really?
Okay. Let's see. Are any of you participating in F1 Fantasy this year? I think literally everyone this year that's here, right? Or is he asking specifically about the official F1 Fantasy game?
I think he's talking about some fantasy game that's not this one.
Yeah, well, that's blasphemy then. We won't talk about that. Will sprint affect lockdown time? Is great question. Absolutely it will. On lockdown weekends, on sprint weekends, lockdown will happen before the shootout. So kind of like it normally locks at qualifying, and shootout is qualifying for the sprint weekends. That is when they will lock. So very good question, because despite all the notifications that you'll receive, I think 24 hours, 4 hours, and 1 hour in advance of a lockdown for having missing spots on your team, people will still end up missing it because some of those will happen on a Friday. So definitely a great question.
I've got a William one that came through. Yeah. You
Sort of
know
be
it
good.
already. Is it a good idea to pick Haas as my constructor to maximize my drivers, as the drivers have way more ways to score points than constructors?
That's an interesting question. And I would point out that drivers as a whole have more ceiling with point scoring than constructors. That said, Haas is a pretty trash constructor. Like there's no upside there at all. Like they went into testing saying that we're not trying to go fast, we're trying to figure out the tires. So that's a consideration there. Now, if we load up on more expensive drivers and we go cheaper on constructor, which drivers are we still building value? Like if we go very top heavy with the drivers, we're probably not going to increase the balance very much, and that'll limit your options as we get further into the season. And it may not even get you the most points. Some of these midfield drivers are going to outscore the more brand name drivers. Like you might see Ricardo score more points than Leclerc or Sainz or Russell or somebody like that, based on all those ways that you have to score points. So I like the thinking that we're considering all the ways that drivers can score points that constructors can't. But
Yeah.
that might also lead us to looking further down the running order to find our best drivers and to find our best value. So
For
that's my
sure.
thought there. Like I personally am not going to be touching Haas. Um, yeah, so that's my thought there. I saw something along the same line as far as lining up for the sprints. So constructors aren't going to be scoring sprint points, just drivers. That's one thing to know. Um, I would say that the value jump as far as constructors go, you definitely see that with a midfield team. Like there's no room for Red Bull to grow. There's some room for Ferrari to grow. Like I would look at like a Racing Bulls, maybe kick Sauber as far as growth potential. I saw Alpine mentioned a couple of times. I hate Alpine, and I'm not a fan of Aston either. As far as upside, I think there's no upside. There might even be downside there if they get jumped by, say, Racing Bulls.
There's two questions from some folks that might not have been here at the top of the hour. So, what was the recommendation on having Max? I'd say rewatch this once we are done. It'll go live. Basically, he doesn't have anywhere to go in value, so the only where he can go is down. That's the TLDR of it. So just be careful about that. Similar question: are you more comfortable? This is from Nick. Starting the league with Max and having a good base for your team, or are you hoping to cash in on the upside of drivers, then transitioning to Max on your team? For sure, the latter. If we're talking about the people who are going to be really hardcore about this game and probably end up, ranked very highly globally. I will say, I think one really important note that I maybe not have said in this show is, this game has a level of simplicity that you don't have to go to the level of depth that we are talking about to have fun and enjoy it. The game is about community. It's about camaraderie. It's about having fun with your friends. It's about creating an elevated experience for the sport and a deeper level of engagement with it. And none of the nuance that we're talking about is something that you have to, nail on the head to have a really good time. So just something to consider. So yeah, I mean, but to answer your question, I think the most diehard players that are really maximizing the mechanics of the game are probably not going to have Max on their team to start with. Somebody asked something that I thought was interesting. I don't actually know that I have a personal answer on it. Eddie said, is it wise to focus on a cheaper constructor leading up to a sprint race and then upgrade to a contender for that possible $3 million increase? Or is the team value jump more realistic for lower midfield teams?
That was the question I was addressing a
Oh,
minute
God,
ago.
sorry.
Yeah. So
All right,
another
we'll move
question
on.
about sprint points. We explained that a bit before. Drivers are going to score sprint points, 20 points for first, 1 point for 20th, and 1 point increments in between. So it won't be giant swings in points, but you may want to consider lining up a driver that's going to generate more points for the sprint weekend, such as Max. Yeah, see the 15-minute diatribe on why you might not want to start with Max to start the season. Down the road, back half of the season, absolutely, like have as much Max as you want. That's what I did last year. because he will consistently generate points unless there's a significant change from last year. But we're a little bit more interested in generating bank balance than we are in generating points at this phase of the year.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, you won't win your season by winning Bahrain in your league.
Just
It's
like
a
you don't win a race on the first lap or in the first turn, that you can lose it.
We are down to about 7 or 8 minutes left. So if there's any final questions, make sure and ask us. Jetto said, do you think there's a situation where you can have all of your drivers for 5 race contracts? There's certainly a situation that can happen. For me, it'll probably never happen. And if it does, they probably won't all have started at the same time. Probably unlikely if you're really maximizing value and you're thinking about what races are in front of you and you're thinking about how do you leave yourself options. It's probably something that is unlikely and strategically indicative of not the best strategy. That's my opinion.
Derek asked, when do we transition? Presumably he means from looking for value to looking at points. I would say that a very self-imposing point is when you don't think that there's bargains anymore.
Yeah.
If you think there's bargains, then you probably want to jump on those bargains pretty far into the year. Like even like once we get into the fall, like there's been a time where I need to fill a spot in my lineup, and I don't necessarily have a lot of funding to work with. I would look then at who's the best bargain. I would say that I'm thinking much more about generating points once we get to about Canada and beyond or so. So like mid-June to early July is when I'm much more focused on generating points than value. But if I see a bargain, I'll still probably take it because I could turn that into an upgrade down the line and generate even more points.
Mm-hmm. Dan, GridRival hat giveaway for the winning GridRival League. Winning GridRival League. What is the winning GridRival League?
Maybe the top finisher in the global leaderboard.
Oh yeah, that's easy. We can do that. You heard it here first. Let's see. Any final questions on there? I don't see any. Things to look for in testing tomorrow. I'm assuming you mean practice. I think the thing I'm going to be looking for is just validating the strategies that I've set based off of what we saw in testing. So I'm going to be comparing mostly, the gap in performance that we saw in testing to really make my final decisions before the first event.
Yeah, and second practice is usually a lot more meaningful than first practice. The times are going to be more aligned with when the actual competitive sessions are. And first practice is often, teams on different programs to figure out tires, among other things. So second practice in particular is what I'm going to be looking at. And the other thing I want to look at, apart from validating testing times, is do we see people struggle with reliability?
Mm-hmm.
Because occasionally that does happen. The cars are a lot more reliable than they were, say, 15, 20 years ago. But every now and then you do see issues with one team or another.
Okay, so last question. We can all three answer it. Let's hear your lineups going into first week. So I'll give you mine and one of my teams. This is probably the lineup that I have that is most likely to change after practice. I have Piastri. I have Magnussen because Magnussen is at the lowest price that I'll just say usually the lowest price driver starting the season is almost guaranteed to go up in value after a couple races. Literally, he just has to finish 18th, 17th to go up in value. So I like Magnussen. I have him for 4 races. I have Piastri for 5. I think he's probably one of the highest ranked drivers. He's going to be consistent. He also has some upside. To that same effect, I have Sainz. Sainz was one of the fastest drivers in all of testing. I think he actually did post the fastest time. So again, if that's validated with practice, I'm going to keep him on my team. I have him for 4 races. I have Gasly, and I really just put Gasly. He's probably a question mark for me, but I put him because he's the highest priced driver in talent driver eligibility. So he's 17.4, right under the threshold. I have Zhou Guan Yu and Kick. Again, if you looked at the times for Kick, they I think were 5th if you combine the 2 times their drivers in testing. So again, if that holds true, if Kick is ranked 5th, maybe even 6th after free practice rounds, I might keep this team. But this is a very bizarre team. I will admit there's $19 million left in my bank right now with this team. So to some of the things we said earlier, it could be a little bit risky. So I'll leave it at that. Michael, why don't you give your team?
Sure. So in one of my leagues right now, and I'll this also give you like an idea of how I think about setting a lineup and what I look for going into free practice. So Sainz, Hamilton, Tsunoda, Magnussen, and then I have an open slot. That open slot, I have about 15.8 million right now, and I can get a little bit more if I change my constructor. Right now, my constructor is Ferrari. My second choice is Racing Bulls. So what I'm looking for is what is Albon, what is Stroll, what is Alpine doing, and how is that looking? Because they're all in that bucket that I could put into that last slot at 15.8 million that I have or thereabouts. And if I do need more money, if I want to spring for a Piastri or something like that, I could change out my Ferrari for Racing Bulls and grab that driver. So I know directionally where I think I'm going to be, but I'm that's how I'm thinking about the flexibility I want in those final optimizations before getting into free practice.
All right. So we'll go with my one full lineup right now. The lineup that I say I'm most proud of. Like I'm kicking around other lineup ideas for another week, but as far as the official F1 GridRival F1 league right now, in order of value, I've got Leclerc for 5 races. I think that he's got some upside. I think he can consistently podium, and I've gone for the 5 races because like once he realizes that upside, he's still going to generate a lot of points for me, and this is a good thing. Uh, Next up, I've got Piastri for 3 races. Again, I think there's upside there. I don't know if the ceiling's going to be quite as high or quite as consistent. Hopefully, he does take a step forward in his second year in F1. Then I've got Tsunoda for 2 races because, well, look at the test times last week. Racing Bulls looks to be somewhat undervalued. For the same reason, I've got Ricardo for 4 races. He is my talent driver. I'm thinking Racing Bulls is fast. This could change tomorrow. We'll see. And then my last driver is Valtteri Bottas for 2 races. I think Kick Sauber might be a little bit faster than was indicated. I think Bottas might be a bit undervalued. Constructor wise, I have Ferrari for 3 races. I think that there'll be some upside, and then maybe I can pivot into Red Bull at that point for constructor.
Very cool. Right on the hour, exactly. Well done. Well, everybody, thank you for joining. Hopefully this was valuable. And as I said, make sure to subscribe to the channel if you want to be in tune with more of these. We're going to be doing them probably every week for Formula One. Hopefully, eventually we'll be kicking them off for NASCAR as well, talking about team strategy, who to drop, who's undervalued, everything like that. Very similar to our conversation today. So make sure you subscribe to the channel if you want to see that. Also, find us on Discord. We have a active and growing Discord community. The link is at the top of the chat. I will leave it up there just for a couple seconds after we finish. Have a great weekend. Enjoy the first race of the year, and we're glad you're with us. Make sure you invite your friends, and we will talk to everybody soon. Thank you very much.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.